Okay, so you know how sometimes late at night you go down these like what if rabbit holes?
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
we're about to do that together right now, but with some actually pretty credible intel.
Sounds a little scary.
Yeah, it is kind of, so buckle up because this deep dive is all about unpacking some seriously alarming claims about Al-Qaeda.
Al Qaeda.
Yeah, you heard that right. Al-Qaeda, their potential backers,
Okay, this is getting interesting.
and the possibility of an attack here in the U.S.
Oh, wow. Okay, I'm all ears.
We're working from a pretty intense source here.
Oh, yeah. What is it?
It's an interview with an unnamed intelligence expert on the Sean Ryan Show.
Okay, I know that show. That's a pretty hardcore military and intelligence podcast.
Exactly. And what makes this so compelling is that this expert is deeply connected,
Yes.
you know?
So it's not just some internet rando with a conspiracy theory.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
And the picture he's painting is way more complex than just, oh, Al-Qaeda's gone.
Right, because I think a lot of people kind of forgot about them after we left Afghanistan.
It's almost like someone ripped up the history books because this guy is saying they're not only back,
They're what?
they're stronger than before.
Stronger than before the U.S. left Afghanistan? How's that even possible?
Well, the expert really emphasizes that the withdrawal created this void.
Avoid.
Yeah, and not just a power vacuum, but like an information one too.
Oh, I see what you mean.
He believes the U.S. has essentially gone blind in the region.
Blind.
Yeah, like we don't have the intel we used to.
That makes sense when you think about it.
And into that blindness
Yeah.
stepped not just Al-Qaeda,
But who else?
other global players.
Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay, this is where you're probably thinking, okay, Al-Qaeda's back, that's bad news.
Right.
But what does that have to do with me?
Exactly, with us here.
Yeah, well, this expert claims they're not just rebuilding.
Oh.
They're actively plotting an attack on U.S. soil.
Whoa, hold on.
And he doesn't stop there.
There's more.
Oh, yeah, he even suggests Russia is involved.
Russia. Come on. How does Russia fit into all of this?
I know, right? This is where we need to put on our analytical hats because the expert uses this term, pipelines.
Pipelines.
Yeah, pipelines to describe Russia's alleged support.
Okay, now that could mean a lot of things.
Exactly. It's not clarified in the interview.
So we're left to kind of speculate.
When you hear pipelines, what comes to mind?
Well, I mean, the first thing I think of is like actual physical smuggling routes, you know?
Yeah, like tunnels or something?
Yeah, or maybe secret shipping lanes.
Right, something like that.
But I mean, it could also be financial channels.
Oh, like money laundering?
Yeah, exactly. Or networks of sleeper cells already in place.
Wow, sleeper cells, that's scary.
Or even something we haven't even considered.
Right? It's almost like the word pipeline itself is meant to unsettle us.
I think you're right.
Like it hints at something flowing steadily and secretly,
Yeah.
and we have no idea what's coming through it.
Exactly. But if we step back and look at the geopolitical chessboard for a second,
Okay.
Russia's motives, at least according to this expert,
Yeah.
seem pretty clear.
What are they?
Punishing the U.S. for supporting Ukraine,
Oh.
trying to force us to disengage from the conflict,
Right.
maybe even divert resources away from it.
Oh, I see. So there's a pressure tactic.
Exactly. It's a high-stakes gamble, and this alleged al-Qaeda connection could be their way to make a huge impact.
So to connect all of this back to you listening right now, imagine this.
This should be good.
Russia potentially using Al-Qaeda
Wow.
to strike at the U.S. homeland,
Okay.
all because of what's happening in Ukraine.
That sounds almost too crazy to believe.
I know, right?
But this expert seems absolutely convinced.
And this is where it gets even more layered.
More layer.
Yeah, the expert claims Russia isn't the only one in the game.
Oh, no.
He argues China is also engaged with Al-Qaeda,
China, too.
but their focus seems to be more on the long game.
The long game. What does that even mean?
Well, he talks about China working with Al-Qaeda and Iran to exploit uranium mines in southern Afghanistan.
Uranium mines. What are they planning with uranium?
Right, that's what I was thinking.
Well, this is where that term dirty bomb comes into play.
Yeah, you probably heard of those, right?
Yeah, they're essentially conventional explosives laced with radioactive material.
Right, the blast itself might not be huge.
But the contamination...
The contaminant, that's the real nightmare.
Exactly. The psychological impact alone would be devastating.
And the expert believes this is precisely the kind of asymmetric warfare China might employ.
Using terrorist groups as proxies.
Yeah, to sow chaos and fear.
It's a chilling thought.
And he goes even further, suggesting that this collaboration with Al-Qaeda is just the tip of the iceberg.
What? There's more.
He claims China sees terrorist groups as a potential weapon in a future conflict with the U.S.
So a way to hit us indirectly.
Exactly, and avoid direct confrontation.
It's a strategy we've seen before with other global powers.
Right, but if China is truly adopting it,
The scale and sophistication they could bring to it is concerning.
absolutely.
This interview paints a picture of a global terrorist network with Russia,
China.
Iran, and even North Korea potentially involved.
Each with their own agenda and level of engagement.
And if this expert is right, the U.S. is either in denial or completely unprepared for what's coming.
He's scathing in his criticism of U.S. intelligence agencies.
What does he say?
He says they're failing to grasp the scope of the threat and missing crucial warning signs.
Oh, wow.
He specifically calls out the FBI's reluctance to add a known Benghazi plotter,
Oh, yeah. What was the name?
Abdul Aim Ali Musa Ben Ali, to their watch
The
list,
watch list.
even though he's allegedly involved in this current homeland attack plot.
Hold on. So they know this guy is bad news.
Yeah.
He's connected to a previous attack, and he's
Mhm.
potentially linked to something bigger that's brewing,
Right.
but they're not putting him on a watch list.
Apparently not.
Why?
Well, the expert doesn't offer a definitive answer,
Okay.
but he suggests it's a combination of bureaucratic inertia,
Classic.
arrogance, and a fundamental misunderstanding of the threat.
Oh, wow.
He believes U.S. intelligence capabilities have been severely damaged by the withdrawal from Afghanistan.
Okay, that makes sense.
He paints a pretty bleak picture,
Yeah,
saying we've lost our on-the-ground presence.
right. We don't have people there anymore.
And former allies in the region now distrust the U.S. so much.
Really?
They'd rather share intel with Israel than with us.
Wow. That's a pretty stark statement.
I know, right?
So what we're hearing is Al-Qaeda's back with a vengeance.
Potentially backed by powerful nations who see them as a useful tool.
And the U.S., according to this expert,
Is either blind to the danger or woefully unprepared for what's coming.
it's a disturbing scenario.
To say the least.
And while we need to be careful not to jump to conclusions,
Of course.
the information presented in this interview certainly warrants further investigation and analysis.
We're only scratching the surface here.
Oh, there's more?
Oh yeah, when we come back, we'll delve deeper into the potential motivations of these global players
Okay.
and what this could mean for the future of international security.
Sound like a plan.
We'll also look at what, if anything, can be done to mitigate the risks highlighted by this expert.
I'm definitely going to need to hear that. You know what really struck me about this interview was how frustrated this expert sounded.
Oh yeah,
It's like he's seeing all these red flags, these alarming connections,
right.
and he feels like no one in the U.S. government is listening.
He specifically mentioned trying to pass information to multiple government organizations.
Yeah.
Even a tip about ISIS, and getting absolutely no response.
Oh, wow.
That's got to be incredibly disheartening, especially when you believe the stakes are so high.
It really raises some serious questions about the state of U.S. intelligence.
Yeah, like are they overwhelmed? Are they dismissing credible threats?
Or is there something else going on that we're not seeing?
You know, it's interesting because you hear a lot about how much data intelligence agencies collect,
Right.
how they're constantly monitoring everything. But if they're not actually using that information,
Yeah, if they're not connecting the dots.
then what's the point?
Exactly. And that's what this expert seems to be highlighting.
It's not just about missing potential attacks. He's arguing that the U.S. has lost its ability to understand the bigger picture.
To anticipate threats before they fully materialize.
And he directly links this back to the withdrawal from Afghanistan.
Okay.
He says we've essentially lost our eyes and ears in the region,
That makes sense.
and that's made us vulnerable in ways we might not even fully grasp yet.
He uses a really powerful analogy.
Oh, yeah. What is it?
He says that former allies in the region now distrust the U.S. so deeply
Really?
that they'd rather share intel with Israel than with us.
Wow.
Think about that for a moment.
Yeah.
Those are countries that used to work closely with us, countries that relied on us for support.
Right.
Now they see us as unreliable, untrustworthy, maybe even dangerous.
So to bring this back to you and your understanding of the situation, imagine you're trying to piece together a puzzle, but you're missing half the pieces.
That's not good.
That's essentially what the U.S. is facing right now, according to this expert.
We're trying to counter a threat that we don't fully understand.
And we're doing it with limited information and fractured relationships.
It's a dangerous combination.
And it's not just about Afghanistan, this lack of trust, this intelligence gap.
Right.
It has ripple effects across the globe.
So it makes it harder to track terrorist networks,
Harder to predict attacks.
harder to build coalitions to counter these threats.
It's like we've accidentally knocked over a domino.
Oh, yeah, I see what you mean.
And now we're watching this chain reaction unfold, and we have no idea how to stop it.
It's certainly a sobering reminder of the unintended consequences of foreign policy decisions.
The withdrawal from Afghanistan was intended to end our involvement in a costly and protracted conflict.
But it seems to have created a whole new set of challenges.
Challenges that could potentially put U.S. citizens at risk.
It's important to remember, though, that this interview presents a single perspective.
Right.
One expert's assessment of the situation. It's crucial to consider other viewpoints and analyze the information critically.
That's a really important point. We're not presenting this as the absolute truth, but as a call to action, a catalyst for informed discussion.
And hopefully constructive change.
Exactly. If we can take anything away from this interview,
Yeah.
it's the urgent need to reevaluate our approach to counterterrorism,
Okay.
to rebuild trust with our allies.
And to strengthen our intelligence capabilities in a rapidly changing world.
We need to understand how we got here,
Yeah.
what went wrong.
And what steps we can take to prevent a repeat of past mistakes.
Because as this expert so starkly reminds us.
The stakes are incredibly high.
But before we get into all of that, let's shift gears a bit
Okay, where are we going?
and talk about the potential motivations of the other players in this game.
The other players.
Yeah, we focused a lot on Russia and the U.S.
Right.
But what about China, Iran, and North Korea?
Okay, yeah, what about them?
What's driving their alleged involvement with terrorist groups? Yeah, it's a good question. We've talked about Russia and China's potential involvement with al-Qaeda.
Right.
But what about these other countries he mentioned? Iran and North Korea specifically.
Yeah, what about them?
What could they possibly gain from engaging with these groups?
Well, it's a bit of a tangled web.
Yeah.
And the expert doesn't really delve too deep into their specific motives.
Right.
But we can kind of make some educated guesses based on their past actions,
Yeah, their track record.
and their current geopolitical goals.
So let's start with Iran.
Okay.
They've obviously had a long and complicated history with the U.S.,
Yeah, no kidding.
and they're known to support groups like Hezbollah.
Exactly. Iran has consistently used support for militant groups as a way to project power and influence.
Especially in the Middle East.
Right. It allows them to challenge U.S. interests indirectly
Yeah.
and, destabilize their rivals in the region.
So for them, it's about pushing back against U.S. dominance
Yeah,
and expanding their own sphere of influence.
that's a likely scenario.
And then you have North Korea,
Right.
which is arguably even more isolated and unpredictable.
Yeah, they're kind of a wild card.
They've been accused of providing training and weapons to groups like Hamas in the past. What would be their end game, though?
That's a good question.
It's not like they have any direct conflicts with the U.S. in the Middle East.
True, but their motivations might be more about sowing chaos and disruption on a global scale.
Oh, I see.
They might see supporting terrorist groups as a way to distract the U.S. and its allies.
Force them to divert resources and attention away from other issues.
Exactly like North Korea's nuclear program.
It's like they're trying to create so much noise
Right.
that no one notices what they're doing back home.
That's a possibility.
And of course, there's always the financial incentive.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Some countries might support terrorist groups simply for profit,
Makes sense.
by selling them weapons or providing them with safe havens in exchange for money or resources.
It's a dirty business.
So what we're seeing here is this complex web of alliances and rivalries,
Uh-huh.
each player manipulating these groups for their own ends.
Yeah, and the scary part is it's almost impossible to predict how these relationships might shift.
Right, or what the long-term consequences might be.
It's a constantly evolving landscape.
It makes it incredibly difficult to develop effective counterterrorism strategies.
The old ways of doing things,
Yeah,
relying on military might and traditional intelligence gathering,
right.
might not be enough in this new era.
This whole conversation has really gotten me thinking about the way we perceive these groups.
Oh, yeah, how so?
This expert kept referring to al-Qaeda and the Taliban as power players on the world stage. It's disturbing to think that these groups are being treated with respect
Right.
and courted by major powers.
It's a sign of how much the world has changed.
Terrorist groups are no longer seen as fringe elements,
Right.
but as potential allies or tools to be used against rivals.
Which brings us back to the most urgent question for you, our listener.
Yeah, given this complex and potentially dangerous landscape,
What, if anything, can be done to mitigate the risk of an attack on U.S. soil?
that's the million-dollar question.
And unfortunately, there are no easy answers.
Right.
But I think this expert's insights offer some valuable clues.
Okay, like what?
Well, we need to move beyond the old paradigms of counterterrorism.
Okay.
We need to be more sophisticated, more proactive, and more willing to adapt to a changing world.
What does that look like in practice, though?
It means investing in better intelligence gathering.
Not just relying on traditional methods.
Right. But also exploring new technologies and approaches.
Okay.
It means building stronger relationships with allies.
Even those who have been critical of U.S. policies in the past.
Exactly. And it means being honest with ourselves about the failures of the past.
The mistakes that have led us to this point.
It's a tall order for sure.
But as we've heard today, the stakes are incredibly high.
The future of our nation, and indeed the world, might depend on our ability to rise to this challenge.
This deep dive has been a sobering reminder of the complex threats we face.
In a world where the lines between state actors and terrorist groups are becoming increasingly blurred,
It's a constantly evolving landscape.
and we need to be vigilant, informed, and engaged if we hope to navigate it safely.
We've covered a lot of ground today,
We have.
and we've heard some truly alarming claims.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed or even helpless in the face of such a complex and dangerous threat.
But we can't afford to give in to fear or complacency.
This expert's message wasn't meant to paralyze us,
Right.
but to galvanize us. He wants us to be aware, to be critical.
And to demand better from our leaders.
He wants us to be part of the solution.
And that's a call to action we can all get behind. So as you go about your day, think about the things we've discussed.
Talk to your friends and family about it.
And most importantly, stay engaged. The safety and security of our nation might very well depend on it.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.